It was a sunny afternoon in the heart of the city, where the streets buzzed with shoppers, families, and friends. Emily Thompson, a cheerful young woman in her early 20s, strolled down the sidewalk, carrying a small bag with a gift she had bought for her best friend's birthday. She was the mayor's daughter, but she never acted entitled. Emily was known for her kindness and warm smile, always stopping to greet people who recognized her. As she entered a boutique to browse for a greeting card, she felt a pair of eyes watching her. It was Officer Carter, a tall, stern-looking policeman known for being strict. He was standing across the street, but seemed to focus entirely on her. Emily shrugged it off, thinking it was just her imagination. She continued looking at cards, humming to herself as soft music played in the store. Moments later, Carter walked into the boutique. He didn't look around like a typical customer. Instead, his sharp gaze was fixed on Emily. She noticed him approaching, but thought he might just be doing his job. However, his words shocked her. "Young lady, I need to see what's in your bag," Carter said loudly, his voice commanding and drawing the attention of everyone in the store. Emily blinked, unsure of what she had just heard. "Excuse me?" she asked politely. "I said, I need to check your bag," Carter repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We've had reports of suspicious activity, and you fit the description." Emily's face turned pale. "Suspicious activity?" she asked, genuinely confused. "I just bought a gift. I have the receipt." But Carter didn't listen. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Hand over the bag," he said, raising his voice. The room fell silent as customers and staff stared, whispering among themselves. Emily, embarrassed and unsure of what to do, slowly handed him her bag. He emptied it onto the counter, revealing a small gift box and a neatly folded receipt. The store manager stepped forward. "Officer, she's been a customer here many times. I can confirm she purchased this," the manager said, trying to defuse the situation. But Carter ignored her. "People can lie," he muttered, glaring at Emily. Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she stood her ground. "I did nothing wrong," she said firmly. A customer nearby had been recording the entire scene on her phone. "This isn't right," the woman whispered, capturing Carter's actions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Carter handed back the bag and stormed out, leaving Emily humiliated. She thanked the manager and quickly left the store, her heart pounding. Little did Emily know, that video would soon be shared online, sparking outrage and setting the stage for something far bigger than she could have imagined. By the next morning, the video of the incident at the boutique had gone viral. It was everywhere, on social media, news channels, and even in group chats. The footage clearly showed Officer Carter confronting Emily, accusing her without evidence, and ignoring the store manager's attempts to clarify. The video sparked outrage. "This is unacceptable," one post read. "She's the mayor's daughter, but what if it was someone else? How many people has this officer treated unfairly?" People across the city were angry, not just because it was Emily, but because it reminded them of other moments when someone was treated unfairly. Emily, on the other hand, stayed quiet. She didn't want to be in the spotlight, but it was too late. Her name and face were already everywhere. At home, Mayor Thompson was pacing in his office. He was furious, but he knew he couldn't react emotionally. As the mayor, he had to address this carefully. His daughter's experience wasn't just personal. It was now a public issue. He sat down and started drafting a statement. Emily walked into his office, holding a mug of tea. "Dad, you don't have to make this about me," she said softly. "But it is about you, Emily," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "And it's about everyone else who's been treated unfairly. What happened to you wasn't just wrong. It's part of a bigger problem. I can't stay silent." Meanwhile, protests were beginning to form outside the police station. People held signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Stop unfair policing." It wasn't just about Emily anymore. The crowd was diverse. Students, families, and community leaders all came together to demand change. Inside the police station, Officer Carter was oblivious to the growing anger outside. He sat at his desk, confident that nothing would happen to him. After all, he'd been on the force for years and believed he was untouchable. But his confidence started to waver when his commanding officer called him into the office. "Carter," the captain began, "we need to talk about the video. This isn't going to go away." Carter rolled his eyes. "It's just the media blowing things out of proportion." She looked suspicious. "I was doing my job." The captain sighed. "Doing your job doesn't mean ignoring evidence or embarrassing someone in public. We've received complaints about you before, and now this is on camera. Internal Affairs is opening an investigation." That evening, the local news featured interviews with witnesses from the boutique. The store manager spoke about how she tried to stop Carter from accusing Emily, while customers shared how uncomfortable they felt watching the scene unfold. Emily sat in her living room, scrolling through the comments on social media. Some messages were supportive, while others were harsh. She felt overwhelmed but knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about her anymore. The city was demanding answers, and the pressure was building. This was only the beginning of a storm that would change everything. The city was buzzing with anger and confusion after the incident at the boutique. People had seen the video and couldn't shake the thought of how an officer could treat someone like Emily without any proof. Everyone was talking about it, at the coffee shop, on social media, and at dinner tables. It was clear that something needed to change. In the midst of all this, the mayor stood firm. "We will not let this go," he said at a press conference. "We are launching a full investigation into Officer Carter's actions, and we will hold him accountable." The announcement quickly made headlines. The mayor's words made it clear that this wasn't just an issue of one person being treated unfairly. It was a sign of a deeper problem. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about how many people had been mistreated by people in positions of power before. Inside the police station, things weren't calm either. Officer Carter, still in denial about the gravity of his actions, was going about his usual work, believing that this would blow over soon. He had been a cop for over 15 years, and he believed he had the right to make decisions on the spot. But as the days passed, the pressure mounted. The department's Internal Affairs unit opened an official investigation into Carter's actions. Emily had been avoiding the spotlight, but it wasn't easy. Everywhere she went, people recognized her, offering kind words and apologies. Some offered their support, while others wanted to talk about what had happened. It felt overwhelming. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to go back to her normal life. But that wasn't possible anymore. Then came the call that changed everything. The detective in charge of the investigation, Detective Ramirez, reached out to Emily. "I'd like to meet with you," he said over the phone. "We need your side of the story for the investigation." Emily agreed to meet him. She was nervous, unsure of what to expect. When she walked into the meeting room, Detective Ramirez greeted her kindly. "I know this is hard," he said, "but your testimony will help us understand exactly what happened that day." As Emily spoke, she described the events clearly, from the moment Officer Carter walked into the store to the moment he left, still without an apology. She explained how she felt humiliated and how, in that moment, it seemed like her word didn't matter. Detective Ramirez listened carefully, taking notes and nodding. He reassured her that the department was serious about getting to the truth. Meanwhile, as the investigation continued, more people began to come forward. Former coworkers and others who had interacted with Officer Carter shared their experiences, and it became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. Many had felt uncomfortable with Carter's behavior in the past, but no one had ever spoken up. The internal investigation grew larger as more testimonies were gathered. The police department was starting to face a bigger issue than just one officer's actions. It was about the culture that had allowed such behavior to go unchallenged for so long. Emily could only wait and hope that, in the end, the truth would come out, and that change would follow. It was clear now that this case wasn't just about her. It was about making sure something like this never happened again. As the investigation into Officer Carter's actions continued, the story began to spread far beyond the city. What had started as a local incident quickly became a national news sensation. News outlets everywhere were picking up the story, eager to cover every detail. Headlines like "Racist Cop Accuses Mayor's Daughter Without Cause" and "Public Outrage Over Discriminatory Policing" filled newspapers, TV screens, and social media feeds. It seemed as if everyone had something to say about the situation. The media frenzy was unlike anything Emily had ever experienced. She was no longer just the mayor's daughter. She was the face of a much larger issue. Reporters began showing up at her door, calling her constantly, and asking for interviews. Emily was overwhelmed, but she knew the story needed to be told. Yet she wasn't sure how much more she could handle. One morning, a reporter from a national news network reached out for an exclusive interview. Emily hesitated but decided that if the situation was going to change, it had to be through sharing her truth. She agreed to sit down for the interview, hoping that her calm and honest words could show the world the impact of what had happened. The interview aired the next evening. Sitting on a couch in her living room, Emily spoke calmly to the reporter. She explained how it felt to be falsely accused, how she had tried to remain calm in the face of humiliation, and how the video of the incident had changed her life forever. "I never thought something like this would happen to me," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was just trying to buy a gift for my friend. I never imagined that I would be treated like a criminal in broad daylight." Her words struck a chord with many viewers. Some shared their own stories of similar experiences. Others expressed disbelief at what had happened. For the first time, Emily realized how much power her story had. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a much larger conversation on race, fairness, and justice. But not everyone agreed with Emily's side of the story. Some news outlets and commenters defended Officer Carter, claiming he was just doing his job. They argued that the public was overreacting and that the media had blown things out of proportion. In one particular interview, Carter was asked to comment on the situation. His response was dismissive and tone-deaf, making things worse. He insisted that he had acted based on his experience and instincts. "She looked suspicious," he said, repeating his original explanation. "I didn't see any reason to back down." This only fueled the outrage. His refusal to apologize or acknowledge his mistake was seen by many as a sign of arrogance and a lack of accountability. As the story continued to unfold, Emily found herself becoming more than just a victim in the eyes of the public. She was now seen as someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. With each passing day, the pressure mounted on the authorities to take action. The voices of the community and the media were too loud to ignore. And so, Emily waited, knowing that change might be possible. But the question was, would the authorities take the necessary steps to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: things were about to change. The pressure was mounting. The public was demanding action, and the media wasn't letting up. Mayor Thompson knew he couldn't stay quiet much longer. As the city's leader and Emily's father, he had a responsibility to address what had happened and to ensure that justice was served. But the situation was delicate. He had to be careful about how he responded, not only because of his position, but also because of his daughter. The mayor spent hours in meetings with his advisors and legal team, trying to figure out the best course of action. There were many voices telling him how to handle the situation, but he was determined to take the right steps. The entire city was watching, and he knew that whatever he decided would set an example for others. One morning, the mayor called a press conference. It was an opportunity to speak directly to the public and to make it clear that he was taking the matter seriously. Emily had asked him not to do anything hasty, but he knew that silence would only make things worse. As he stood at the podium, the mayor looked out at the room full of reporters. His face was serious, but there was a quiet strength in his voice as he began to speak. "I want to address the situation that has caused so much pain and outrage," he began. "I know that many of you are wondering how something like this could happen, and I share your concern. What happened to my daughter is unacceptable. No one should be treated the way she was, regardless of who they are or where they come from." His words were measured, and though they were filled with emotion, they remained calm. The mayor continued to explain how the city was launching a full investigation into Officer Carter's actions. He assured the public that there would be no rush to judgment, but that Carter would be held accountable for his actions. "This is not just about one officer or one incident," the mayor said. "This is about a pattern of behavior that we need to address. It's about making sure that everyone in this city is treated with respect, fairness, and dignity." He paused for a moment, looking down at the podium before lifting his gaze again. "I want to be clear. This is about my daughter, but it's also about all of us. We cannot ignore the wider issue of how people are treated based on their appearance or background. We need to do better." The room fell silent as the mayor's words settled in. There was a sense of sincerity in his voice that many could feel. He wasn't just speaking as a father, but as a leader who recognized the need for change. After the press conference, there was a mix of reactions. Some people praised the mayor for his clear and direct response. Others felt it was too little, too late. The pressure was still on, and the investigation into Carter's actions was just getting started. Emily, watching the press conference from her living room, felt a wave of relief. Her father had done what she hoped he would. He had taken a stand. Still, she knew that the battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning of a much larger journey toward accountability and change. As the days passed, the weight of the situation began to settle in. The city was waiting, watching closely to see how the investigation would unfold. Would Officer Carter be held accountable? Would this lead to real change? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The story was far from over. The pressure surrounding the case only grew as the investigation into Officer Carter's actions moved forward. The media, the public, and even the police force itself were all waiting to see what would happen next. Emily had done her part by giving her testimony, and now it was time for the legal process to take its course. It wasn't long before the case was officially taken to court. The trial began with much anticipation, and people from all over the city gathered to hear the proceedings. The courtroom was filled with tension as everyone waited to see how things would unfold. Emily sat quietly in the front row with her family, her hands nervously clasped together. She knew her testimony had already been heard, but she wasn't sure how the trial would play out. The prosecutor, a sharp and experienced lawyer named Rachel Matthews, started the case by presenting the evidence. The video of the incident, which had already been viewed millions of times, was shown to the court. It played out in front of everyone. Officer Carter accusing Emily without any clear reason, humiliating her in front of other shoppers, and insisting that she was guilty without giving her a chance to explain. As the video finished, Rachel Matthews spoke. "This video clearly shows that Officer Carter acted without any reasonable cause. He accused Miss Thompson of theft simply because of her appearance. This is not how law enforcement should behave. It's a violation of her rights and a disgrace to the badge that Officer Carter wears." The prosecutor's words struck a chord with many in the courtroom, including some of the officers who were present. They had never seen the video from this perspective before, and it was clear that Carter's actions weren't just inappropriate. They were unjust. Next, the defense lawyer, Mr. Jonathan Pierce, stood up. He tried to defend Officer Carter by arguing that the officer was just following his instincts. Officer Carter is a man who has served this city for over 15 years. He acted based on what he thought was suspicious behavior. Mistakes were made, but they were not made with malice, Mr. Pierce argued. But the more he spoke, the more it became apparent that his arguments were weak. He couldn't deny the video, and he couldn't deny the testimony of the store manager, who had confirmed that Emily hadn't stolen anything. One by one, more witnesses took the stand. The store manager, employees who had been there that day, and even customers who had witnessed the scene gave their testimonies. They all confirmed what Emily had said. Officer Carter had acted out of line, and they had all felt uncomfortable with how he treated her. As the trial went on, it became clear that the case against Carter was getting stronger. Emily, though nervous, sat through every moment of the trial. She could see the reactions of those around her, and it gave her a sense of reassurance. People were starting to understand what had happened to her, and the truth was becoming undeniable. By the end of the trial, it was no longer about whether Officer Carter had done something wrong. It was about how much responsibility he would take for his actions. Emily wasn't sure how things would turn out, but she felt proud that she had stood up for herself. She knew that no matter the outcome, her voice had been heard. The trial would soon come to an end, and everyone was waiting for the verdict. Would Officer Carter be found guilty of his actions? Would he face the consequences of his mistake? The courtroom waited with bated breath for the next chapter to unfold. The courtroom was filled with anticipation as the trial came to an end. Everyone knew that the next few hours would decide Officer Carter's future and the future of the case itself. Emily sat in the front row, her heart racing, but she tried to remain calm. Her family was beside her, their faces a mix of hope and nervousness. As the judge prepared to announce the verdict, a deep silence settled over the room. The tension was palpable. People who had followed the trial closely all held their breath, waiting for the final decision. Would Officer Carter be held accountable for what had happened? Would justice be served? The judge, an experienced woman named Judge Edwards, looked out at the courtroom and spoke in a steady, clear voice. After careful consideration of all the evidence, testimonies, and arguments presented during this trial, we have reached a decision. Emily could feel her palms sweat, and she could see the rest of her family anxiously clutching their seats. The entire city seemed to be waiting with them, hoping for the right outcome. The defendant, Officer Carter, Judge Edwards continued, has been found guilty on all counts of misconduct, racial profiling, and false accusation. His actions were not just a mistake. They were a clear violation of the trust and respect that the public has in its law enforcement officers. A wave of relief washed over Emily. It was over. Justice had been done. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Some were happy with the verdict, while others were shocked that it had come to this. Officer Carter stood still, his face a mask of disbelief. His defense attorney, Mr. Pierce, looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. The man who had once proudly worn his badge now faced the consequences of his actions. The judge continued, Officer Carter's behavior has hurt not only Miss Thompson but also the trust between the police and the community. It is the duty of law enforcement to protect and serve, not to make baseless accusations and treat people unfairly. For these reasons, Officer Carter will be sentenced to 4 years in prison. The words seemed to hang in the air. 4 years. It was a harsh punishment, but many in the courtroom felt it was deserved. For Emily, the sentence was a bittersweet victory. While she was relieved that justice had been done, she knew the damage caused by Carter's actions would not be easily repaired. The scars would take time to heal, but at least they now had a chance to move forward. After the verdict, Emily stood up and left the courtroom with her family. As they walked through the hallways, they were met with supportive looks and words from the people around them. There were still challenges ahead, but Emily had made a difference. She had stood up against injustice, and in doing so, she had helped to make her community a better place. As the day came to a close, Emily felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and even a little hope. The trial had been a long journey, but now it was over. Carter had been held accountable, and the city could start healing. But the battle wasn't over yet. There was still work to be done to ensure that no one else had to go through what she had. Emily was determined to keep pushing for change, knowing that her story had sparked something much larger than she could have ever imagined. The trial had ended, but the story didn't stop there. In many ways, the real work was just beginning. The verdict against Officer Carter sent a powerful message to the city and beyond. It wasn't just about one officer's actions. It was about addressing the bigger issues of fairness, equality, and justice. Emily had become an unexpected symbol of change, and she wasn't going to let the momentum die. In the weeks following the trial, the mayor pushed for meaningful reforms in the police department. He knew that for the city to heal, there had to be real changes. Emily became an active voice in these discussions. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had ever felt judged unfairly because of their appearance, their background, or their race. The mayor worked closely with community leaders, police officials, and activists to create new policies. The first major step was introducing mandatory bias training for all law enforcement officers. The training focused on recognizing and addressing unconscious biases, helping officers understand how their actions could impact others. It was clear that Officer Carter's behavior wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was part of a larger problem that needed to be addressed. In addition to the training, the city also created a civilian review board. This board would have the power to review complaints against police officers and ensure that complaints were handled fairly and transparently. The idea was to build trust between the police and the community by giving citizens a voice in how law enforcement was carried out. As these changes began to take shape, Emily found herself speaking at various public forums, schools, and community events. She shared her story with others, using her voice to encourage dialogue about racism and unfair treatment. She wanted people to understand that while her experience had been painful, it was also a chance to learn and grow. The more Emily spoke, the more she realized the importance of her words. She wasn't just telling her story. She was helping to change hearts and minds. People came up to her after events, thanking her for her courage and for bringing attention to issues that had been ignored for too long. She could see the difference she was making, and that filled her with a sense of purpose. But not everyone was supportive of the changes. There were still some who believed that the police department was being unfairly criticized. They argued that Officer Carter's actions didn't represent the entire force. But even though there was some resistance, the majority of the city supported the reforms. The pressure from the community, the media, and the families affected by unfair treatment was too strong to ignore. Over time, the changes began to take root. Officers who had previously been reluctant to engage with the community started to participate in local events, and more conversations about race and fairness took place in the open. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. Emily's journey had started with an injustice, but it had led to a movement that would hopefully inspire other cities to take similar steps. While the road to full equality was still long, the city of Emily's hometown had made a strong start. As Emily looked out over the city she loved, she felt proud of what had been accomplished. Change had come, and she had played a part in it. And though there was still work to be done, she knew that by standing up for what was right, she had made a lasting difference. The city had come a long way since the trial, and so had Emily. What had started as a difficult and painful experience had turned into a powerful catalyst for change. Though the road had been filled with challenges, she had found strength in her voice and a purpose she hadn't expected. As the months passed, the reforms began to take hold. Police officers now underwent regular training on bias and fairness, and community members felt more involved in local policing decisions. People started to see the police not just as enforcers of the law, but as partners in ensuring the safety and well-being of everyone in the city. It was a small but important shift. Emily continued her advocacy, speaking at schools, town halls, and community meetings. She spoke with confidence now, knowing that her words had the power to inspire others. Her message was simple but powerful. No one should be judged by how they look, where they come from, or what they have. Everyone deserved fairness, respect, and dignity. At one of her speeches, Emily spoke to a group of young students. She told them about the incident at the store, how it made her feel, and how it had changed her life. "It wasn't easy to stand up and speak out," she admitted. "But I did it because I knew it was the right thing to do. And you can do the same. When you see something wrong, don't stay silent. Speak up. Your voice matters." The students listened intently, and Emily could see the impact her words were having. Afterward, many came up to thank her, sharing their own stories of feeling treated unfairly. Emily realized that her journey wasn't just about her. It was about the countless others who had felt the same way and were looking for someone to stand up for them. Though the city was making progress, there were still moments of tension. There were still people who doubted the effectiveness of the changes or questioned whether real change was even possible. But for Emily, these challenges only strengthened her resolve. She knew that change didn't happen overnight. It took time, effort, and persistence. One afternoon, Emily received a letter from Officer Carter. It was the first time he had reached out since the trial. In the letter, he apologized for his actions and admitted that he had been wrong. He expressed regret for the pain he had caused her and the community. Reading his words, Emily felt a mix of emotions. She was still angry at the way she had been treated, but there was also a sense of closure. Officer Carter had admitted his mistake and had taken responsibility for it. In many ways, this was his first step toward redemption. Emily chose to forgive him, not for him, but for herself. Holding on to anger would only hold her back. She knew that the true power of healing came from moving forward, from making sure that the pain wasn't carried into the future. As Emily looked out over the city, she felt a deep sense of hope. There was still work to be done, but the change was real. It had begun with a single act of courage, and now it was spreading, slowly but surely. The world wasn't perfect, and there would always be challenges, but Emily had learned that even in the face of adversity, hope and redemption were possible. By standing up, speaking out, and showing kindness, she had made a difference. And in the end, that was all that mattered.